Pupil. Get him in here.
Well, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
And welcome to the Senate building. This is the first time we've done this press conference here. I kind of like it. I hope it works good for you guys. Maybe it'll become our tradition. Today we're going to talk about Vision 2020 and what we intend to do. You like those words, 2020, vision? Anyway, nice try. But first I want to look back at where we came from. Well, when the dust settled on the 2018 election, Minnesota was the only state that had a divided legislature, and somehow we managed to work together and actually get a lot done with a new governor and a new Speaker of the House. And one of the other things that was really important to me was that we lowered the tone, so that we worked together. Where we disagreed passionately, but we yet found a way to pass a two-year budget that funded all of our priorities, both for the governor, the Speaker, and myself, and moved Minnesota forward with a balanced budget almost on time. I think we were one day into a special session, but really it went really well considering that we were the only divided legislature, and we found a way to do that. So I want to talk about Vision 2020. Today it's our overall broad statement of where we're going. We do this each session. We first start out with broad vision about what we're doing and where we're going. Then we begin to roll it out by committee, and they begin to work through the details. And so some things we have pretty firm in our mind where we'd like to go. Other things we realize that there needs to be more conversation. So let's talk about taxes first. Taxes is an important area for us. Once we funded all of our budget priorities and once we filled up all of our reserves, you heard me say at the November forecast we should give the rest back. And if we look back to what we've done the last few years, we did provide some tax relief. Republicans in the Senate pushed for, and for the first time in almost 2 decades, we got a middle-class income tax cut. That was a big deal to us. That was one of our top 2 priorities. The other one was opportunity scholarships for the less fortunate kids that are failing in some of our schools. We could not agree with the governor on that one, but the lowering of the middle-class income tax bracket was a big deal. And then a host of other things that we accomplished. We began to exempt Social Security income. We haven't completely gotten rid of that. Minnesota is one of a few states that does tax Social Security, but we began to work on that. We provided ag property tax relief, small business tax relief. We provided a credit for people, for graduates that had high student loans. So there was a number of things that we got done. The total number of that was about $650 million, and that was because we felt like the taxpayer who does provide us that revenue deserves it back when we funded all of our priorities. So what do we want to do in 2020 related to taxes? We want to give some of it back, and I want to talk about a couple of areas that we've mentioned. I think it's time to fully exempt Social Security income. Let's be one of those states that doesn't tax our seniors when they've paid all the way through, and then now they have to pay again. And so that will be one of our priorities. Another one is providing ag property or ag relief through Section 179. That is when a small business or our farmers buy property, they deducted according to a formula, and we want to line up with the federal government. Otherwise, they're going to have a taxable event this year that I want them to avoid. So those are a couple things. We've talked about other things that we can do, but those are 2 that seem to be bubbling up that I think we'll look at. Let's jump over to health care. It's not just about giving money back. It's also what are we doing within each of our areas of responsibility, and what are we doing to make sure that Minnesota's affordable. And I'm proud to say that the work we've done the last 3 years on health care through reinsurance, price transparency, and other measures have actually made Minnesota the cheapest health insurance premiums in the country. Go back 4 years, that was not true. And so we're moving in the right direction there. Through reinsurance, we stabilized the insurance market. We have more competition that has come in. And so that's all good news about what we have done. But what do we want to do in 2020 for Vision 2020 to build on those successes? And one of them is to work on pharmaceutical transparency with a drug reimportation program so that you can go to your pharmacy and you get prescriptions at prices similar to what they have in Canada. That is a big thing that we can do. Another thing related to healthcare is the Department of Health and Human Services, and we want to hold them accountable like what we did with MNLARS, Minnesota License and Registration Services. Report after report after report from our nonpartisan auditors shows that there is a lot of dysfunction there, and it's time to clean that up. And my hope is that the governor will work with us. We did do that with MNLARS. We had been talking about that needed to be cleaned up for 4, 5, 6 years. This governor leaned in with us. We got a third party to take a look at it and agreed with us that it was a problem, and we actually found a direction that is working, that we have moved forward with that one, and that one is working and moving in the right direction. Department of Health and Human Services is much, much bigger. It's got many more problems, and one of the things that I hope we think about and find a way through is finding a way to somehow divide it up to provide a little more oversight because there's too many areas that have too many problems. But that'll be one of the most important things that we could get done this session, but it has to be with the governor leaning in with us. But you will see solutions coming out of our committees that are working in that area. Another big, broad area that we're going to work on is education. Like DHS, we want to restore integrity to help the needy, but we believe the next generation deserves better than the mediocre results and achievement gaps that we have. The next generation deserves better. Republicans increased per pupil funding formula 2% per year for each of the last 4 years, putting resources directly in the classroom. We've provided money for critical school needs such as expanded school readiness and special education, and school safety was a top priority and will continue to be until we no longer have schools that say that they need more funding to make sure their schools are safe. But our vision for 2020 for education will address Minnesota's persistent achievement gap, beginning with our youngest children, using data to identify which early learning programs actually work the best, and then make those our top priorities for what we work on. We're also going to renew our commitment to real school choice for families and students stuck in failing schools. Think about, you've probably all heard that definition of insanity, but it applies here. If you keep doing the same things, why do you think you're going to get different results? And so we've talked about opportunity scholarships. There are some other programs that we are working on now that I need more data before I want to talk about them publicly. But what are some things that we can do that actually move the needle to close that achievement gap? We can do this. It's just not doing the same old and expecting different results. And so we are committed to that. I want to work with the governor. I'm hoping that we can find some things that aren't just doing the same things and actually move that needle. Public safety is another area that we want to talk about. You've heard us talk about public safety. It's something that in the last year seems to have risen as an area that we see as a problem. You have near daily reporting of gang violence spilling into the streets and public transit, and I find that very alarming. Being from outstate, I talked to a number of folks outstate that are concerned about coming to the Twin Cities. Is it safe? Well, we just need to assure them that we have a handle on this, and so we're going to take a strong look at this. There's a lot of talk about criminal justice reform, but we have to put public safety first. And so releasing repeat offenders for low-level crimes and not enforcing laws we currently have to keep guns out of the hands of criminals is not the direction we should go. We're not going to wait until next session to start work on this. You see that our Judiciary Committee and Senator Limmer already had one hearing related to public safety and what gun laws are on the books. And next week there's going to be another meeting up in Hibbing, Minnesota from that same committee that's going to hear a number of bills, but one of them is going to be related to felons that have guns. We need to be tougher on them. They already know it's illegal, and yet they're choosing to have guns and they're felons. That's only going to increase the odds that there's going to be a crime. Another area is going to be energy. This is an area that I think everybody is focused on. How do we move towards cleaner energy? We're not going to wait. Again, we're going to have a meeting this upcoming week in Rochester with Senator Osmek. But our focus is going to be on clean energy that's renewable, or clean energy that's reliable and affordable. So not just 100% renewable. Think about last year in February, the polar vortex, and we had our energy grid produces 30% of it comes from renewable energy, but that energy only gave us 5% of our energy during that polar vortex. So you can't have 100% renewable, but what we can focus on is clean energy that's renewable, that's reliable and affordable. And so that's things like the new technology related to nuclear. That's using more hydro. It's recognizing that coal coming from North Dakota is getting cleaner and cleaner. I took a visit out there and toured that, and they have technology right now to capture all of the CO2, so that there's no release of CO2. So the point is, clean energy first is not just 100% renewable. It's just focused on how do we have clean energy, how do we reduce our carbon footprint with an all-of-the-above approach. And then the last area I want to talk about is bonding. I heard the governor talk about his bonding bill being around $2 billion. Our forecast, when we have a budget forecast, it tells us how much we can do in bonding without having to pay any more in interest above what we've planned, and that number is $755 million. That's the number that comes out for that, and it's not going to be the $5.3 billion that of requests that we have, and the governor made a decision that of that $5.3 billion, he's going to cover $2 billion of it. But the point is that we're publicly saying we think we should have a bonding bill. I think it should be closer to the numbers that we had before. The last two were $825 million and $988 million. That's the last two. The closer it is to that number, the closer or the more support I have for it. But that is something that we are committed to doing. We are committed to working with the governor and the speaker to, at the end of session, actually pass a bonding bill. We want it to focus on wastewater infrastructure. We want it to focus on all of our higher ed buildings. We want it to focus on roads and bridges. It's the big projects that affect everyone. Then it's not quite so much about the actual number as actually doing the projects that are beneficial for the entire state. So, in conclusion, the full Vision 2020 agenda includes also priorities related to greater Minnesota jobs, clean water, support for farmers and veterans, and addressing child care and workforce needs for a growing economy. Those you'll hear more about as we roll out, just like the last number of years we've done this. And you can go to our website where there's more details already. That's www.mnsenaterepublicans.com. So with that, I'll answer your questions, and if I can't answer them, somebody behind me might be able to.
I just had a question about the not taxing Social Security benefits. How much money does Minnesota take in every year, do you know, from taxing Social Security benefits? And how much of a priority? It sounds like this is pretty high up on the list of priorities for you. How high is it?
I should have that exact number for you. I don't. I know it's under 200 million, but let me get the exact number to you. It's been our priority for, I would say, 4 to 5 years. We've been talking about this is something we should do. One of our other ones was exempting military pensions from taxing in Minnesota. We got that one done, and so now we're starting to work on this one. But this is, I've had a chance to talk to a number of seniors that live out of state, and it's amazing how many people live there a little more than 6 months because they don't want to pay our income taxes and they don't want to pay our estate taxes. And so this is one that I think this is the time. We have a surplus and we could do it, but we all have to decide that it's something we're going to do.
You didn't mention the car tab fee holiday that you brought up in November. Is that still a priority? What would that look like if it is?
So we when the November forecast came out, I listed a bunch of things. One of the things I talked about is maybe we'd consider a tab fee holiday, which I thought it was a good idea, but as we have more, I still think it's a good idea, but as we have more conversation, some of the ideas are beginning to filter out, and two of them that are rising to the top are the two I mentioned.
Senator, the Commissioner Fran's office does an analysis of what they think the state's guidelines for bonding can accommodate, and they're at $3 billion. How is it that your number, which isn't a political number, you're telling us it's almost a statutory rule number, is a quarter of what Byron Fran says? Actually,
I think $3 billion is the political number because you can promise more people their projects. The governor came out with $2 billion, which is in the range where I say I think we're going to get a bonding bill done. Had they been at $3 or $4 billion and we had been at $500 million, that would have been much more difficult. And so interest rates are low right now, which is a good time to borrow, but we also have $1.3 billion of cash, and there's no reason we can't explore that idea as well for projects rather than bonding. And in the end, on a bond, you still got to pay that back over 20 years. And so that's why we're careful. We haven't been in a recession for a long time. I think we have a few more years before we'll be in one, but it's prudent to not have too much that you have to pay back later.
Senator,
Bill.
Commissioner Franz says the state can leverage a lot through debt service, and therefore the bonding bill ought to be larger. How do you respond?
Yeah, so the governor's come out with $2 billion, and we haven't come out with our number yet. I gave you the last two numbers that we actually signed into law and said, but I am committed to making sure that we have a bonding bill. There always is a bit of compromise, and especially with a divided government, and I'm committed. I think it's beneficial to Minnesota. The wastewater infrastructure needs around the state are serious, and we have to find a way to make sure that we take care of them. Our buildings have to be kept up. We have a number of issues with roads and bridges. I will say about roads and bridges that we have, in the last 3 years, increased funding ongoing, taking half the sales tax on auto parts. That's new money coming into roads and bridges that is ongoing. And I think the last 2 years, I believe it was $600 million of new money, in addition to the money we already had, is being poured into roads and bridges. But it is always a priority. The folks in Minnesota want to make sure our roads are kept well.
Senator, you've proposed this idea of tax breaks related to school choice that has not succeeded after a couple of tries. Is there another way to approach school choice that could get the support of Governor Walz?
So the question is there other ways to support school choice? There are, and we are working towards some of those right now. I can't talk further, but yes, I've seen at least 3 different proposals that don't cost a lot of money, but actually could move the needle. And that's what we're all trying to do. How do we close that disparity gap? And it's not doing the same things we've always been doing. We have to be willing to try other things. And so I'm committed to doing that. I've heard other states, for example, that pay teachers that go into districts that are difficult, they pay them more money. So what happens then is they get more qualified teachers that are willing to go to some of the more difficult places. So we should be looking at what other states are doing. We should not be one of the worst. We should be one of the best.
Senator, along those lines, will your caucus support the proposed constitutional amendment to guarantee quality education?
So there's discussion about a constitutional amendment for education that we do not support. I don't know that frankly, the minority in the Senate supports either. For me, it's an issue of the responsibility of the legislative branch. If we get sued because we're not, quote, doing our responsibility, then the courts decide. I have had conversation with the people that are promoting this, and that's the very thing that I told them, is the legislative branch is given the task to solve this and not the courts. And so, no, I don't support it.
Senator, I don't see recreational marijuana on here. Is that an oversight?
We're not going to do recreational marijuana. I think we did a hearing on that last year. We brought in people from Colorado, and all of the data was bad. Homelessness rates were up, accident rates were up, mental health problems were up. There was nothing good that would come out of it. But to be clear, when we find medical reasons for marijuana, we are open to that. So that's where we draw the boundary. I've seen it blurred from some people on the other side, but we say recreational marijuana, no. We're open to at least considering what are the sentencing guidelines. It's not so much about how we do things, but I don't ever want to say that it's good for Minnesota when I don't think it is, but medical marijuana is.
One of the questions about medical marijuana is how expensive it is for people who need it. And one proposal for reducing the price is to allow what apparently we now call flower, smokable leaf forms. Is that something that the caucus would look at?
So the question is related to, is there any ways to lower the cost for medical marijuana? I'm willing to explore those as long as we're not creating a path that makes it easier to have recreational marijuana. That is what happened in Colorado. The way they set up their medical marijuana made it so easy that it instantly became recreational. So I want other states to have the dealing with these issues related to whether it's good or not good. I want to see all the data from the other states. Let those 10 or 11 states out there that have done it break the ground, and we can learn from them. But in the end, I think we'll come to the conclusion that it's not good for Minnesota.
Can you get into more specifics about what you plan to propose regarding crime in the Twin Cities? You mentioned going after felons who have guns, but you also mentioned crime on light rail and buses. What are your proposals?
Well, that's where we're letting that committee begin to vet that out, and that would be true of health care and their issues related to the Department of Health and Human Services. This is the broad vision to say this is where we want to go. I listed one thing that's already risen up that we want, and that is if a felon has a gun, that is a big deal because it's already illegal, but that would be one of the areas that we need to focus more attention on to make sure that they don't do it, and therefore the penalties have to be higher. But beyond that, this is where the committees are going to work out the details. This is where we say this is where we want you to head, and give them some direction.
Would you consider defunding, lowering the funding for agencies like Metro Transit if you feel like they're not getting a handle on what you want?
We haven't talked about that at all.
You floated earlier this year, though, LGA. Some maybe looking at LGA formulas. Is that still on the table?
That was a broad discussion about what are the things we can do. We haven't talked about that at all. The only one we've talked about specifically in detail is the fact that felons are using guns and don't seem to be nervous about it. That's the one that we already know that we think could actually make some headway. Beyond that, we want to work with our local communities to move towards solutions that work. I was concerned that Minneapolis and St. Paul maybe didn't have enough police officers, and their police chiefs were saying we need more officers. So, that's an area we can explore as well. But I want to work with our local governments.
Senator, to get back to the issue of tax, the Social Security, and the others that you mentioned, Governor says this is not a budget year. This is something that needs to wait for 2021.
Yeah, well, I would say you're correct. This is not a budget year, so we don't really need a supplemental spending program. And so what do we do with that $1.3 billion? We talked about making sure the reserves stay full. That's one of the things that everybody has been talking about, and that's where I'm going to push to say let's give it back in some form. If the governor wants a supplemental budget plan, that's my same argument for him. We already did that last year. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. We certainly are communicating. We've had a couple of conversations within the last 10 days. So there is good dialogue between the governor, myself, and the speaker. And we'll make sure that some of the key things that we need to get done this year, like a bonding bill, do get done.
On health insurance, do you anticipate reinsurance will be in the mix?
No. Last budget cycle, we wanted to renew reinsurance for 3 years. The governor wanted to get rid of it. In the end, we settled with 2 years of reinsurance. That basically pushes it out past the next election. The governor wants universal health care, or I forget what he calls it, but we think the private sector is the better way to solve that. And the fact that we have the lowest insurance rates in the country right now, I think, points to that. But we pushed that off by agreeing to 2 years of reinsurance.
This drug reimportation plan that you're talking about, can you explain how that would work legally? Because aren't there federal regulations and laws to deal with?
It is complicated, but I have talked to other people in other states that have actually enacted it, but that doesn't mean it's working yet. And so we're going to be looking at other states to see They've done it. Can we do it, and does it actually do what we want it to do? But I want to explore it because we want to find a way to get prescription drugs that are cheaper for people buying them.
So who's the senator who's going to be leading that charge then on that one?
Senator Benson's leading that one.
What about insulin?
Can I just ask you, maybe I misunderstood, are you suggesting subsidizing in some way to get more police officers in St. Paul and Minneapolis? And wouldn't that kind of lead to a reaction in other communities that they too could use benefit from more law enforcement officers?
So local government aid in general was meant for police and fire as its primary purpose. Beyond that, we just need to have a conversation. I am saying that crime is up and it's not okay. What are we going to do about it? And so that's why we're laying this out as a big vision piece. But I heard insulin. I'll mention that because I mentioned I've had conversations with the governor and the speaker in the last 10 days. We've had 2 or 3 conversations where we're talking about how do we finish getting this over the finish line. On the Senate side, we have Senator Pratt and Senator Benson that have been doing an amazing job. And keep in mind that we took care of about 80% of the problem during session, where we passed legislation where now when you have health insurance, your fee for insulin is $25 a month for virtually everyone. So that was a big, big step. But there's still an emergency piece that we're trying to solve. I'd say they're this close. That's how close they are. And so it's just a matter of what I'm telling our folks is, look, if you guys agree on 70%, do the 70%. You don't have to have everything, and that's what I would say to the governor and the speaker. Whatever we can agree on, let's do that, and the rest can be a fight.
So this could be a first week of session kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, I mean, they're literally working right now, having conversations today. We had conversations last Friday. And it doesn't feel like there's much in the way other than taking 70% instead of 100%.
You said that you're saying crime is up and it's not okay. Is crime up, or is it just homicides that are up in the cities?
I don't have the exact data in front of me.
Senator, early voting starts Friday. First primary in a long time for the presidential race. Secretary of State Simon has said maybe he wants to propose some guardrails on what the parties can do with the voter data they're getting, knowing which party people are voting with. Is that something you're interested in, you think needs to be changed?
I don't mind if the data that's available to the public's available to everyone. I don't know what Secretary Simon has talked about specifically. I'd have to think about it. But we passed legislation a couple of years ago where the data is available to people, and so, yeah. So I don't know what Secretary Simon's talking about. You can give me the question, I'll think about it, and I'll answer it later.
He's suggesting that the parties not be allowed to share the data. Right now, there's nothing prohibiting any of the 4 parties who would get that data from posting it on the internet, everyone's party affiliation, the ballot they requested. And he's suggesting that by the end of this session, you could actually pass a law that would prevent that from happening, and that would effectively put a cap, put the lid on the bottle of this primary's data.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. That's first I've really thought about it. So.
Thanks, guys.
Senator, one more. Polymet.
Last one, Polymet. I do want to answer Polymet. I mean, this is brand new today, and the appeals court basically overturned the direction they were heading, so now they have to go through another hurdle. I think it's very, very frustrating. Being a former Iron Ranger, it's something like 10,000 jobs from copper nickel mining and all the jobs around it, and they have to wait again, and that is very, very disappointing. I think extreme environmentalism and, well, what I believe is liberal courts have come to a conclusion that is not helpful. Those resources are needed by the entire world. Minnesota is going to do it better than anybody else as far as safety and making sure that we take care of the environment here, and it's going to create a bunch of jobs for people in Northeast Minnesota. So deeply disappointed. It's just another hurdle that we have to go through, and I'm going to stand with the mining company or mining people. I think it's just companies, employees, the range, they all want it. So anyway, thank you.